Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode from Your Own Pathway, Leadership and Mental Wellbeing. For those who don't know me, my name is Payavu. I'm a licensed psychotherapist and trauma informed leadership consultant. And I help leaders realign to their values and rebuild trust because leadership isn't just about performance, it's about how power impacts people. So let's own it. Today's episode is something that, with everything happening around the world, especially here in the United States, and I live and have worked, and I'm in a region, again, for those who don't know me, I'm in the Twin Cities area in Minneapolis, Minnesota area, Minneapolis St. Paul area. And around here, the state of Minnesota, and especially around the Twin Cities area, there are quite a few Fortune 500 and global companies that are headquartered here with enormous influence, economic power, and visibility. The reason why I'm doing this episode today is to talk about how fast the world is changing and how businesses, regardless of where their stance or if they choose to be neutral or whatever it is. The thing is, don't be political. We don't want to be political because being political can impact us. And I understand that. However, in 2026, things are changing and things are changing really fast. And if you are a leader, CEO who is watching this episode or is curious to know what is happening, the thing is, things are happening so fast, and how you choose to respond really matters now. Again, for a long time, when organizations talk about risks, they were talking about like legal exposure, lawsuits, compliance, whistleblowers, regulatory action. And yes, of course, all those things still matter. But the thing is, in 2026, we are seeing things very clearly and different in this. Legal protection is no longer the primary risk of organizations. In 2026, we are seeing this, that one of the things that companies and teams and leaders and CEOs really have to now start considering is reputational harm, loss of trust, and moral injury. And I want to say that, people think, oh, this is just a US issue. It is not just a US issue. This is a global leadership concern now. And so I want to say that this is why I do the work that I do, my presence-based organizational realignment consulting. And no, this is not a way for me to advertise my services to say, hey, but I want to say this before I go further. I want to name the lens where I'm speaking from because the work that I do, the consulting work that I do, is presence-based organizational realignment, which is PBOR. And I created this consulting because it's trauma informed, but it is also context aware. And what I mean by this is organizations do not just operate outside of the world. They operate within. And what is happening socially, politically, ethically, and systematically impacts how your employees show up, how leaders make decisions, how trust is built or eroded. And so PBOR exists because leadership models that ignore context and pretend that work happens in a vacuum, that is not going to fly by anymore. And so How organizations used to understand crisis is historically, organizations understood crisis as internal. And what I mean by internal is like the internal misconduct, the internal misalignment, the internal leadership failure, and leadership became skilled at managing internal symptoms such as, HR, legal, compliance, PR containment. And the assumption was that the most external world was mostly about markets and money. However, in 2026, that assumption no longer holds. The thing is, in 2026, external systems now shape risk. And organizations are no longer destabilized only by internal crisis. They are also destabilized by external perception. And this external perception includes consumers, communities, employees, and the general public who now have the real power. The thing is, people can now easily see who organizations support, which policies they benefit from, where money flows, who is protected, and who is not. So when harm is visible and leadership chooses to stay silent, silent doesn't disappear. It becomes interpreted. So the thing is, for so long, and I think in all of our fields, like in business, in school, in therapy, it's always like, stay neutral. Don't say anything. We don't want to get political. The thing is, unfortunately, silence is no longer neutral, especially in 2026. And this is why trauma informed leadership matters so much. When organizations support harmful policies, benefit from harmful systems, or choose to remain silent while harm is visible, many people interpret that silence as agreement or being complicit, even if leadership does not intend it. And I just want to say that this episode is to really educate and to really inform, and it's not about shaming. It's about educating, and especially in current times. And it's also about power and how power is perceived, especially for powerful organizations and very well known organizations. When you have power, silence communicates alignment with sometimes, unfortunately, harm. You know, you cannot, in 2026, if your company chooses not to say anything, being Switzerland and, being neutral is no longer something that is going to be accepted, especially in with everything going on. And if you are a powerful business, you cannot choose to remain Switzerland because people, unfortunately, will make assumptions about where you stand if you choose not to speak out. So moving on, I showed this, about neutrality, and I want to put this sample example again of the neutral letter that was signed by 60 of the top businesses, employers here in Minnesota. And I actually also used this letter in my Target episode. And so hopefully you all can see this. If not, you may see the letter and I might stop talking. So there's some issues going on here. So Recently, a dozen of major, employers in Minnesota signed a joint letter calling for peace, cooperation and unity during a period of real harm and instability, especially in late January. So, I'm going to show the letter here. Bear with me for a second. So I hope you all can see this. If not, I'm going to keep talking. And so this letter, of course, was dated January 25th after the second event here in Minnesota. And, it says the business community in Minnesota prides itself in providing leadership in solving problems to ensure a strong and vibrant state. The recent challenges facing our state have created widespread disruption and tragic loss of life. For the past several weeks, representatives of Minnesota's business community have been working every day behind the scenes with federal, state, and local officials to advance real solutions. These efforts have included close communication with the governor, the White House, the vice president, and local mayors. There are ways for us to come together to foster progress. With yesterday's tragic news, this was after the second incident with ICE, we are calling for an immediate de escalation of tensions and for state, local, and federal officials to work together to find real solutions. We have been working for generations to build a strong and vibrant state here in Minnesota, and will do so in the months and years ahead with the equal and even bigger, even greater commitment. In this difficult moment for our community, we call for peace and focus, cooperation among local, state, and federal leaders to achieve a swift and durable solution that enables families, businesses, and our employees and communities across Minnesota to resume our work to build a bright and prosperous future. So again, 3M Alliance, Atlanta Health. I mean, some of the biggest employers here in the state of Minnesota, and also very, very well known. And so I guess for anybody who read this letter or saw this letter, what kind of feelings does it bring up for you? I know that when I read that letter at first, I was like, "Oh gosh, you know what? It's great to have all these people, all these big companies to sign this letter." But as I read the letter, I especially the part about peace and resolution. I'm like, what are you actually doing? You're talking about peace, cooperation. Like, what kind of cooperation are you talking about? In unity during a period of real harm and instability. And as I said this in my previous episode, some people appreciated that something was being said, but a lot of people just reacted the same way as I did. I basically said this doesn't actually say anything. There was no concrete interventions or no commitments, no explanation of how employees will be protected, or no acknowledgement of power or responsibility. And I get it, they may be doing things behind the scenes that I don't know about. But if you're going to put out a public statement and don't hide behind neutrality. So, from a trauma informed leadership perspective, this is where a lot of the moral injury occurs. And rightly so. After people read this, they're like, what? That doesn't say a darn thing. And not that, not that that statement was malicious, but the language was offered without any presence. It was very lip service. And in 2026, unfortunately, lip service no longer is tolerated and does not work. And in 2026, consumers and employees expect more than symbolic neutrality. They want to know, how will you protect people? What are you actually going to do? Like, what are you actually going to do? And who are you willing to advocate for? So, statements without action now read as avoidance, not leadership. And I get that. Reading that letter, I was like, that does not say anything. So, moving on, I think there's something that needs to be said that a lot of organizations and leadership really need to start having recognition in is moral injury as an organizational risk. So, again, from a trauma informed lens, silence or vague neutrality in the presence of harm creates moral injury. People don't experience it as professionalism, they experience this as abandonment, dismissal, protection of power and people. And moral injury does not stay emotional. It shows up as fractured trust, disengagement, moral collapse, brand erosion, and you've heard my episodes about Target and how Target is a classic example of brand erosion, consumer withdrawal. They're facing that right now. And organizations can be fully compliant and still enter crisis. So, moving on, when I talk about crisis, I think so many organizations think about crisis and think about lawsuits. In 2026, oftentimes the new crisis now is crisis without the lawsuits. And so this is the shift leaders are now catching up to is organizations and companies are now entering crisis without lawsuits. Not because laws were broken, but because trust was. Most leadership teams have playbook for legal action or whistleblowers or internal scandals, but very few have playbooks for moral rupture, ethical scrutiny, value-based consumer behavior, and this is external systems failure, not internal misconduct. So consumers are becoming more discerning. And what this means is that we're not just seeing a backlash, it is discernment. A lot of people, consumers have watched harm go unchecked for years. As a result, many consumers are more ethically aware, more intentional, and more selective of where they're spending their time and especially their money. People are using their money to support organizations that demonstrate ethical coherence. And this includes internally, externally, and systematically. They look for organizations and support organizations that promote well being, protect mental health. And when I say mental health, they protect the mental health of their people, support sustainability, and show ethical alignment. Because now money has become a moral signal. So I want to bring this back to PBOR and looking at the whole system. This is why PBOR was created and is essential, especially working in with organizations like this, because it looks at internal systems, leadership behavior, external forces, um, public perception, ethical alignment, and for a long time, the external system was reduced to just revenue. However, in 2026, the external system now includes trust, awareness, values, collective memory, and public perception is no longer cosmetic. It is structural. So, I want to close this episode by saying that being trauma informed, and when you think about trauma informed, you don't think, oh, business. Trauma informed, especially in organizations, is not about shrinking. It is having the capacity to face what is uncomfortable and respond with presence. In 2026, leadership silence is no longer a protective strategy. No matter how much you try to, it is no longer a protective strategy. It is now a visible moral position. Organizations that understand this and realign with integrity rather than avoidance are the ones that will continue to have trust from people and the public. So, this is all I have for this week's episode from Your Own Pathway in Leadership. And I hope that you all take this episode and really consider, especially if you are in leadership, and um, how neutrality is now being viewed, especially by the public and especially by your consumers. So, again, please take care. And this is Your Own Pathway, where leadership is owned, presence matters, and power is used responsibly. Take care. I'll see y'all. Bye.